morning, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kyungmin Park, an education consultant at IDB, and it is truly a pleasure to be here. We are here today to launch a new tool that responds a very timely, important question. How much does the digital learning actually cost? Since the pandemic, a lot of countries have significantly increased their investments in digital education. However, the investment often lack clear standards or the evidence-based guidance on the key components to achieve the meaningful impact on teaching and learning. Over the past year, IDB's education division has been working closely with EDU, our outstanding partner from Brazil, and with our colleagues from Connectivity, Markets and Finance Division and Technology and Transformation Department to address this challenge. As a result, we designed a free and easy-to-use tool to facilitate more informed conversations between the school leaders and the telecommunication engineers. Today, we are very proud to introduce it to all of you, the Digital Learning Cost Calculator. To open this event, it is my pleasure to introduce Fernando Legalia, Social Sector Manager at IDB, who is joining us virtually today from Bolivia.
Many thanks, Kyungmin, and good morning to everyone. It's a real pleasure to join you, even virtually, as Kyungmin said, from Bolivia, for the launch of the Digital Learning Cost Calculator. Let me go straight to the point. When we talk about digital transformation in education, the conversation usually centers on two things: devices and connectivity. But anyone who has worked on this knows that devices and connectivity are simply not enough. You also need, for example, teacher training. Our data from 6 countries in the region shows that fewer than 30% of teachers report having basic level of digital competencies for teaching. But you also need learning platform, governance, maintenance, and quality of connectivity, not just coverage. Because a school technically connected, but with a signal that cannot support the work in a classroom, it is not connected in any meaningful way. Until now, there was no serious tool to bring all these dimensions together and estimate what each one costs and show how they fit together into a coherent plan. That is the gap that this calculator is designed to close. It is the first tool of this kind in the region. It is rigorous, it is transparent about its assumption, and it lets countries model different scenarios based on their own priorities, whether that means starting from rural schools, focusing on teachers, or planning a complete system transformation. I also want to recognize that this tool is one of the concrete and critical deliverables of the Memorandum of Understanding between the IDB and the World Bank on digital transformation. And I know Andreas is there representing the World Bank and is representing this collaboration. I want to thank him and his team. This is what the partnership looks like in practice: aligning our effort, pooling our knowledge, and producing public goods the country can actually use. And I also want to thank the government of Korea, whose financing made the development of this tool possible, and also our partner, EDU, who built it with us. So let me close with the most important message. The calculator is free. It is designed to be tailored to your needs. The IDB will accompany you if you want to adapt it to your reality, your data, and your planning cycle. And to our partners in this room, from multilateral organization to the private sector, please use it, share it, and challenge it. The more the tool is tested, the more useful it becomes. Because our goal is somewhat simple: to move from information into action and from investments to real impact on learning. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Fernando. As the development of this tool has been supported by the Korea Trust Fund, we are pleased to welcome our next speaker, Hyungchul Lee, who is the Executive Director of South Korea at the IDB. Over to you, Hyung-Jul Lee.
Good morning, everyone. It's an honor for me to deliver a speech for this important event, Digital Learning Cost Calculator. And I would also like to first thank Education Division for organizing this event and bringing together group of stakeholders committed to advancing digital education. Korea greatly values its long-standing education partnership with the IDB and with the countries across Latin America and the Caribbean. Over the past 2 decades, this partnership has invested more than $15 million in over 30 education projects, with a strong focus on advancing digital innovation in classroom throughout the region. This cooperation reflects a shared conviction that education is the most foundational investment for the long-term development of a country. Korea's own development experience demonstrates this clearly. How can Korea, a nation once known as a poverty-stricken, war-torn, and having nearly no economically viable natural resources, survive and stand as it is now? The answer was education. The continuous cultivation and innovation, which only human capital can make possible, made a real difference in Korea. So while investment in physical infrastructure helped boost productivity, sustained national investment in human capital provided the most transformative pathway out of poverty. Education enabled individuals to realize their potential, strengthened the aspiration of personal and social mobility, and expanded opportunity across society. These lessons remain central to Korea's approach to development cooperation today. As economies evolve, education continues to serve not only as a driver of growth, but as an inclusive foundation that allows individuals to participate meaningfully in society. Today, countries are increasingly navigating the demands of digital transformation. In this context, inclusive access to digital education is becoming increasingly critical. Digital education should no longer be viewed as a complementary service or pilot intervention. It represents foundational infrastructure for future development because it equips people with the skills needed to thrive in digital economies. When applied strategically, digital technologies can make education systems more inclusive, more resilient, and more effective. Recognizing this potential, Korea is placing growing emphasis on digital and AI-enabled education to ensure that further generations are equipped not only with critical technical skills, but also with adaptability and resilience in a rapidly changing global economy. Turning this vision into practice, however, requires thoughtful planning and informed decision making. In this regard, a digital learning cost calculator represents an important contribution by providing a practical, evidence-based framework for cost analysis and scenario comparison. The tool supports more transparent dialogue across sectors and help bridge the gap between strategic vision and implementation on the ground. Recently, the Deputy Prime Minister of Korea and the President of the IDB signed a memorandum for establishment of IDB AI Center in Korea, which will make a cornerstone for development in AI capabilities in the LAC region. I think Korea firmly remains committed to supporting countries in Latin America and the Caribbean as they advance their digital and AI-enabled education systems. This AI initiative open new opportunities to advance in inclusive and human-centered application of AI in education. In closing, let me reaffirm Korea's appreciation for our close partnership with the IDB and our shared commitment to advancing digital transformation in education. We are pleased to support initiatives that help translate strategic dialogue in practical action. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Lee. Now, I'd like to invite our next speakers from Mega EDU, who is our key partner for the development of the digital learning course calculator. Cristiani Castillos, CEO of Mega EDU, and Ana Luisa Prado, project manager of Mega EDU. Over to you both.
Thank you all so much for being here. It is a pleasure to show you in practice what we are talking today. So this is the digital learning cost calculator, and this is a free tool that everyone can access, and we hope that helps countries and policymakers to start this conversation on how to implement digital transformation. And I want to show you what is capable of doing, right? So first, this tool start with a little bit of an introduction. What is this what that we call digital transformation? And this digital transformation for us, it is these 5 dimensions. First of all, connectivity, to get internet, meaningful connection to the schools, but for every classroom, not just like the administrative rooms, but for every classroom, for every student. The second one, devices. So every student, every teacher can have some kind of a device. And the key message here is an appropriate device, because we saw in Brazil that sometimes when governments, they are trying to make some kind of saving, which they should do, they try to make saving in the specific type of device. And that does not sometimes generate the kind of digital transformation that we need. The third one is teacher training, and we talk a lot about that. But when we are planning for digital transformation, sometimes we forgot about calculating the cost of that, and there is the cost of that. The fourth one, it is educational platforms. That is that we see a lot like about platforms that can help teachers teach and enhance learning. And the fifth one, that some kind we forgot sometimes when we are talking about how to implement this structure, is what kind of governance we need. The government should have like a structure that needs to implement, to plan, and to coordinate, and to monitor all of the 4 dimensions before that. And so this is kind of what we understand. And for all of that, we do have a cost. So let's go inside of what the digital calculator means. And the first big challenge is data, right? Sometimes the countries, they don't have data. It is really, really difficult. And the calculator does have all pre-filled data for all the countries. And this data come from like reliable source like IDB itself. But the user can edit this data if they do have like some more updated source. So let me show you what that, oops, last time, up here. Let me show you what that means. The first step is actually having the educational data that you want. And by educational data, you will have like the total number of schools, the total number of rural schools. And here in Peru, this is a particular reason because the number of rural schools, it is particularly high. And we know that for rural schools, it's particularly challenging to implement digital learning. So that's why we have these numbers like splitting up. We have the students, we have the number of teachers, and we have them by primary and secondary schools. And here we do have the source of each one of those numbers. And that was a specific ask for policymakers, because we know that ensuring that this comes from a reliable source is really important. So after we having the educational data, we come for the first dimension. This dimension is usually the most expensive one. And so you'll see that. And here we have the cost for getting the connection to the school, but also to having the connection to make sure the Wi-Fi gets to every corner of the school. So we have, for example, the price of satellite connection, the price of fiber connection. And here is one thing that I want to make sure that I show you, that we have quality parameters. For example, here for the internet connection, we have a quality parameter of 1 Mbps per student. Here for the access point, that is the equipment that we make sure the Wi-Fi gets to every room, we have the quality parameter of 1 for every 2 classrooms. And you can check these quality parameters. They are explained in a really, really broad technical note that we made. But you can just like check out the AI that we have here. I'm not going to do that because I don't have the time, but I invite you to do that here. And you can download the technical note as well. But here you have the sources and the parameters as well for every one of those data that we put here. This is the connectivity section. Let's go to the devices one. And devices is particularly interesting because how many devices should I get is usually one question that governments struggle with, right? And here in the calculator, we do have 3 scenarios. They were chosen because of the references that we have in the technical note. We have, by default, we have this mild use one that for secondary students, it's about like 5 hours of technology in the classroom per week. And for primary students, like 2 hours. But let's say that this particular country, it's implementing right now and probably has like a budget that is less than that. It can go for like a minimum use. And let's see here how the budget changes, right? And here is like 300 millions. And if you go for comprehensive use, it goes for like more than 700 millions. And those kind of trade-offs are trade-offs that governments really, they have to face. But sometimes they face those trade-offs without the numbers. And we hope that the calculator can help with that. Let's go. I don't know, which one do you want to go? The minimum? The mild one? Minimum. Okay. You guys want to be economic, right? And I want to show you something else. Here we have the price of desktops, that is for school managers. We have the tablets for primary students. We have the laptop for teachers. We have the cloud box for secondary students. And here, this is from a price survey that we did. But let's say that that you know that we can get this cloud books for much less. For example, for 100. Saying that the price here changes already, so you can make those trade-offs like that. But let's say no, it is 700. It's going to change as well. I'm going to stick with 300, okay? Unless you guys know how much it is in your country, do you? So let's stick with 300. So let's go to teacher training. Teacher training, we have by default the total number of teachers here. But let's say that this country, Peru here, say that it wants to start with STEM teachers to be trained. So I can change here. I don't know how many STEM teachers, but let's say 50,000. Okay, and Carla, 50,000, let's say. So this changes the cost too. So the idea here is to make those kind of changes, make those kind of choices based on the trade-offs that they have financially. And the other choice that we do have in teacher training is the modality of training. By default, the calculator starts off with the hybrid training, but we can choose like an online training or an in-person training. And look, the cost goes like way different as well. It can go from 3 million to 9 million. I'm going to stick to the hybrid as well, okay? Otherwise, you're going to say me to go to the online training because I know you guys are kind of really want to save here. Educational platform, we do know here that we have the average price for teaching and learning platform, and we here the calculator calculates based on 1 license per student. And finally, the governance that we calculate here based on the team, the government team necessary to implement those kind of transformation. The central team, a regional team, and also a team that is responsible to go through to the schools to make sure that these changes are implemented. So a local team. And here we are done with the 5 of them. So let's generate the results. So this is the results to implement for all the schools, but let's say that this is too high, right? So we do have other scenarios. Let's say to prioritize the secondary schools or to prioritize the rural schools, right? So we can play a little bit with it to understand what kind of choices make sense for those which one of particular context for this kind of person. And here we can understand like how this cost is divided between these different dimensions. And here I cannot have it. Oh, okay, here, got it. You can generate a report that will be that would have like the cost for every item, for example the access point, for the devices. So we hope that this kind of tool would help governments to see the trade-offs that they are facing, and to start off the conversation about digital transformation with solid evidence. Of course, we know that this is just a starting point, right? And there's a lot of work to do after that. But, well, I'll pass off to Christiane to talk a little bit about our experience with that in Brazil.
Hola, buenos días.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to speak briefly about what we've done. This is the first steps we took in Brazil. Mega EDU was an initiative that we started about 5 years ago. We started asking people how they could connect, how we could have connectivity on an airplane without schools being connected. Obviously, technology was not the answer. And everybody was saying, well, how are we going to connect schools if we don't know what the costs are, what the distance is? So basically, the point was that it was due to the fact that there are no priorities. But in actual fact, it's because there isn't enough data to start planning all this. So what we tried to do was optimize a database in order to make people start planning, including the government, of course. And what happened? So you have the data, And this many times will help us to understand the different mechanisms in order to understand this investment. So in Brazil, for example, how are we extending connectivity? We did an analysis to see where there are schools that have telecommunication services and what the cost is to expand the telecommunications of schools. And so we have different financing tools. Obviously, when there's a school that is very close to a telecommunication infrastructure, our development bank launched a credit line so that providers can reach the school with a lower interest rate because the provider is going to help the entire community to receive this investment. Or somewhere else, for example, the big operators started coming up with projects for connections because they could deduct all this from their taxes. They didn't have to pay the taxes. They connected in the schools, and due to the fact that we had the data. So first of all, the first very important thing is that there are ways to have greater resources if we have trustworthy data. Another important element is that what we saw in Brazil is that if you have models, when you start the purchasing models, then you can start lowering the costs. We could talk about private industry, we can reach greater resources this way, but we have to start using the data that is available. Another very important issue is that governments, we have partnerships with the 27 governments of Brazil, and started saying, so now what is something that is done commonly? We send a chip to the students, but if you don't have internet in the schools, or if you can't do the upkeep of this equipment, this makes no sense. So when you hear what happens in other countries without evidence, it's quite natural to do an investment in something that will not become learning. So I personally love this topic, but I also lived in Mexico, in Colombia. This is something very personal because I like to help other countries. I was talking with them. The people in Colombia was saying that they started doing some studies and investigation, and now they have all the money that is required in order to do this. But of course, this is quite dispersed. It's scattered here and there. They can't do this in the most efficient way. So once you have the data available with evidence, with the priorities, with the scenarios that you need, there are quite a few resources that have been invested in a number of countries, but we still can't do this in the most cost-effective manner because the pandemic, as we saw, so people were buying tablets, doing these investments, but what we see today is that nothing really is happening. So this was one of the first things that we did in Brazil. We had the data and we used them. They're reliable data that come from trustworthy sources, and the country can use all this, can use its own database, use its own information, and many other things can stem from all of this. So we were quite happy with this project. We enjoyed it. We did it with the bank. I want to thank Mercedes and Gabriela, but particularly Gabriela, who built this vision of how to get to other countries, how to reach other countries. And the calculator has quite a bit of science at its base, quite a bit of evidence, and we do hope to see that these countries are leveraging their resources better in order to make that investment in technology for schools.
Thank you so much, Cristiani and Ana Luisa. To continue the discussion on the key dimensions and enabling conditions for the effective digital learning, we now move to our next panel. This panel brings together the colleagues from across the IDB Group and the World Bank, combining the perspectives from education, connectivity, infrastructure, and private sector. I'm very pleased to introduce our panelists. Gabriela Gambi, education specialist at the IDB, Anderson Caputo, the Chief of Connectivity, Markets, and Finance Division at the IDB, Christina Simon, Director of Social Infrastructure at IDB Invest, and Andreas Blum, Manager of the Education Global Practice at the World Bank. The discussion will be moderated by Carla Gamberini, Education Consultant at the IDB and one of the lead contributors to the development of the calculator.
Thank you, Kyumin. Hi, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. So this first panel, we are gonna talk about the enabling conditions for digital transformation in education that are the dimensions that Ana Luisa already shown in the calculator. So let me start with a simple but critical idea. And we have all seen it in the calculator. Digital transformation is not about technology. It's about teaching and learning. And how can we plan effective projects that lead us to impact teaching and learning? And what do we need to consider to actually reach there? So at the IDB, for years of collaboration with countries in the region, we have identified these 5 enabling conditions or enabling factors that we're calling dimensions here that need to work together and to come together to impact digital transformation as a system in itself. And the challenge is to identify the complexity of those 5 dimensions. So starting with meaningful connectivity, that is not only about deploying satellites, but it's actually ensuring that students can learn and can use the internet to learn with it. Then devices, how many, why a laptop or a tablet, when a laptop or a tablet. Third, teacher training, because teachers are the central element and leaders in the classroom, actually making digital transformation happen and making teaching and learning effective. Educational platforms. What resources do teachers need to actually teach with quality? And finally, governance, that is behind everything and that needs to set up everything to make it happen in the local, regional, and national level. So framing this complexity, I want to start asking Gabriela, Gabi, from your perspective, how should countries approach this complexity? And what does it really take to move from fragmented efforts or individual investments to a truly systemic digital transformation?
Thank you so much, Carla. Thank you all for being here. And I wanted, first of all, to thank this amazing team. Carla is part of it, Kyumin, the whole education division, Pau, Enrique from CMF and World Bank also, for sharing this crazy idea of, of creating a calculator. So in terms of, thank you so much, Carla, for the question. In terms of the enabling conditions and what it takes, I think we have been working on this challenge of transforming digitally transforming education systems across Latin America and the Caribbean. And we do have a paradox of nowadays us as users being very simple to be connected. It looks that way, right? But when we go to education systems and we're talking about a national transformation, that it's equitable, it's much more challenging because one realizes that all of these components that Carla talked about, these 5 dimensions, they have to come together harmonically. And we do have to make decisions now based on the data that we have that usually is not that updated, right? And I like to say the time is of the essence, mainly when you're working with extremely vulnerable context, because particularly those people cannot wait. They cannot wait any longer, a year longer, 3 years, 10, when things and data come together. So one thing that governments, we realized that we could support countries in this challenge is being able to put all those pieces of the puzzle together in a way that is backed by evidence, so they would quickly be able to plan, implement, and evaluate in such a way that is easy, is a conversation starter. That's what we always say. Definitely, we hope to get your feedback on how can we improve what we have shown here, but we have to move from conversation to action. So I think these are the key message that I wanted to share. And as you saw in the demonstration that Mega Edu did, it's a big number. It can be scary, right? But that's what it takes to make it in an impactful way. And when we talk about numbers, I think we're less worried if those are the right or wrong numbers, and we are more worried on how can we move towards action and see if that number may be too high. Let's make it half, or I can put in half. Maybe you could put in the other half. But it's a critical challenge in terms of moving the needle in digital education, and it makes us realize that we cannot do it alone, right? No one can tackle this challenge individually. So definitely we need private, other partners. We need telecommunications partners to join us in this challenge.
Thank you, Gabi. So now, Anderson, I wanted to ask from the perspective of financing and infrastructure side, how can countries ensure that these investments are not only planned, but also focus on those most vulnerable areas that we were talking about, that Gabi was mentioning, and sustainable and effectively coordinated? And how can the calculator help with this?
No, thank you very much, Carla. Let me thank Gabi and Mercedes, first of all, for the invitation for that, but for the work that we are doing together. For me, this is an incredible example of how institutions like ours, coming with different perspectives, the different skills we have, we put together solutions for what we are being asked as development institutions. We are being asked to help authorities plan better and actually implement. And then yesterday I was having a great time navigating into this calculator and saying like, wow, like a lot of real good work behind data. And that's an incredible tool that I'm sure will be extremely useful and a great example for other sectors and work we do. So with that, in your question, the calculator helps countries plan better, as I'm saying, by translating educational goals into concrete infrastructure and financing needs. What is very important is that you have a common language between education teams, engineers, finance officials, because we speak different languages. And then that matters because poor planning also, when you have poor planning, as was mentioned here, that widen gaps, especially and was mentioned for the rural and underserved schools, which is so difficult to do. So we need to think that equity has to be built in from the start, and that's what this project allows, and not being added later. And financial sustainability, that's the angle that we're talking here, is critical because connecting school is not enough if countries cannot maintain them the service quality over time. Now was mentioned here, like when you make poor choices. So this means looking beyond upfront investments, but looking to operating costs, the service reliability, and institutional capacity that's there. And that's why all these dimensions that are contemplating are so important. And then at CMF, we have worked closely with the education team, as I mentioned, to map connectivity gaps across Latin America and the Caribbean, and build a stronger evidence-based decision-making. And together also with other partners like ITU that we work so closely, we also developed a platform to estimate the cost of closing the digital connectivity gap in the region. And these tools are already helping countries move from broad ambitions, that's to really try on a more realistic basis and prioritize investment plans. So beyond diagnostics, the IDB is supporting countries in designing connectivity strategies that direct public investment, attract private operators to underserved areas that are so important. No? So ultimately, the calculator supports the coordination that's so important across sectors by giving education, infrastructure, and finance teams a shared framework for action. That's what we need. Thank you.
Thank you, Anderson. Now I want to turn to Cristina. From the perspective of the private sector. And so we know that the private sector operates with a strong focus on financial sustainability. And sometimes taking digital transformation to the most vulnerable areas could be a challenge for financial sustainability. So, from your perspective at IDB Invest, how do we make these investments economically viable? What role can the private sector play in advancing digital transformation in this context? And how can we better align business incentives with the goal of expanding equitable access to quality education?
Well, thank you. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, Gabriela, Mercedes, for inviting me to bring the private sector perspective. This is a clear example on how we collaborate at the IDB Group and we bring both public and private perspectives at the same time to the same table. This is a critical question for me because for achieving digital transformation at scale will simply not be possible without the private sector. The private sector brings three essential contributions: brings capital, brings innovation, and brings execution. Through public-private partnerships or PPPs, the private sector can help government design, finance, build, and operate this digital and physical infrastructure that education systems need, particularly in areas where public resources alone may not be sufficient. This is especially important for connectivity infrastructure, where PPPs can align the public objectives to the private sector expertise and efficiency, helping extend high-quality services to underserved and remote communities. We have seen an example of this PPP, and in Uruguay, in the case of Uruguay, we financed 2 PPPs at IDB Invest for education, and this was a great initiative to help expand access to high-quality learning environments while ensuring long-term sustainability. It is a strong example on how private capital can complement the public efforts to deliver better education outcomes. So telecommunication companies, infrastructure providers, technology firms, and investors can play a vital role in expanding the foundation of digital learning. But for private investments to flow, especially into underserved areas, the right conditions need to be in place. These are often challenging markets where demand may be limited, deployment costs are high, and returns take longer to materialize. That is precisely where the public sector has a fundamental role to play, creating the enabling conditions and enabling environments that make investment feasible. These include clear regulatory frameworks, transparent procurement processes, well-designed incentives, and these incentives may need to be aligned to help balance risk and reward. And this is precisely the key, where including the private sector, it's where it brings the full solution. And this is where the IDB Group may be particularly of help and where we could add value. Work alongside with the government and the private firms to design a structure that are financially feasible, that bring the private sector to solutions where there's not enough public funding. I think it's vital, and we have a role there. And this is particularly important, or where these tools that you have assigned are particularly important, because it enables the private sector to reduce one of the highest risk in this type of investments, which is precisely uncertainty. These tools can give certainty of the cost of the investments that the government is planning to do, where the private sector can complement, where they can be of help. So this is more or less my point of view on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. And we've talked about connectivity, we've talked about investments, about how to make this happen, but to actually have the change in the classrooms, we need teachers. So I want to ask Andreas, from the World Bank's perspective, how can countries ensure that these investments are effectively translated into improved teaching and learning that leverage digital technologies, and how can the calculator help with this?
Perfect. Thank you very much, Carla. First of all, thank you to the whole IDB team for inviting me. It's a pleasure to work together with IDB. I should say I very often check out tools and report on that's coming out of IDB. They're very relevant and they're high quality. And this is also a case of it. I cannot wait to go home and play with the different and see where the countries come up, because it is very relevant connectivity for all our schools in the region. We all know that we are going through a revolution in the education sector, probably a revolution that hasn't taken place at this scale for 100 years. And it's happening in all the schools. All our students are actually using smartphones and using AI. But the teachers are not really using AI. And the policy frameworks, the abilities, the learning platforms are not there. And there's a huge agenda to help teachers catch up with students and use information technology to advance learning and prepare kids for the new world that will be digital, right? So there's a huge agenda here that has to take place. We need the connectivity. There's no doubt. That's a necessity. I have a good story on the importance and the amazing abilities now to bring connectivity. I was in Brazil in a state in the Pantanal. We took 3 hours out from the state capital. We took a canoe to the school. And then you arrive at the school and my phone starts beeping. And it had connectivity. That little Starlink satellite was connected in the middle of nowhere. Amazing technology. And I do think Brazil is the leader in this. I don't know if you're working with that state, Mega EDU.
You should thank Anna. And
but it was an amazing experience. But then we go into the school, and there were a few devices, but they had dust on them, to be honest. Students were not referring to it, and teachers were not referring to connectivity. So amazing connectivity, but not at all integrated into the education system. So that's the agenda, and the agenda has to start with the teacher. And we have very large set of amazing teachers that are committed, but they're not really trained. And they don't have the digital tools to use it in their teaching, both in terms of learning platforms or automatic grading or making their lessons more alive using multimedia. All that requires training. And it's not really being driven out. So for our perspective, exactly as the tool was showing us, we need to take into account the teacher training. We need to work with them, and it's not just a one-time thing, right? It's for every new tool we roll out, whether it is for AI-powered evaluations, whether it's a learning platform, whether it's student attendance that get digitalized. Every one of these things need to have training of the teachers and the administrators behind it. So teachers is just absolutely fundamental. I want to say that we have one public tool that we developed together with IDB on digital teach. So this is classroom observation that helps school directors, that helps teachers themselves assess how do I adapt multimedia and technology into my teaching. So it has a rubric around its specific incorporation of technology and the use of that I very much also would like you to take a look at on the World Bank website. I don't have the QR right now, but digital tools, digital teach, and it will pop up. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Andreas. And talking about that, about the collaboration between IDB and World Bank to be able to make happen these enabling factors. Teach Digital is one product for teachers. Then from the IDB side, we also improved and launched a new release of the EduTech guide that is also available for you to explore for free. And that is for teacher strengthening. But of course, this takes a coordination and a special task force that work together. And of course, that can be challenging. So I wanted to ask Gabriela and Andreas as well, what does it take to effectively collaborate in building more of these public goods that are available for our countries and more and that contribute to resilient education? And as well, what are the strengths and challenges of coordinating across institutions towards this better teaching and learning?
Thank you, Carla. Oof, a lot of work. No, and I would start with trust. And here, I just wanted to take a moment also to see who are we representing in this panel, right? So Carla, she has an amazing trajectory on civil society in Peru. Andreas from World Bank. We have IDB Invest, and we have connectivity, markets, and finance. So usually, I would say 3 years ago, no one would see a panel like this, right? Or of us sitting together, World Bank and IDB, talking about digital transformation with private sector and with telecommunications. And that's why we did this panel, because this is meaningful, this is important. When you think about governments also working together, that's also an institutional challenge. And I'm hoping Nadal Fabro, Phil, and Dennis will talk about it also, because you don't see several times, Ministry of Telecommunications and Ministry of Education talking the same language, as Anderson pointed out. And even so, sitting the same table as the private sector, right? And that creates a lot of challenges for coordination. And it is challenging. I mean, we saw that after 3 years working together, World Bank and IDB is not easy, but having trust is definitely the first step. And once that's built, and once we understand that the challenge is so big that one institution or one person cannot make it all, then I think we see partnership as a strength, not as a competition. And that's key when we're trying to build resilience in our educational systems. So if we understand that the pandemic was 6 years ago already, right? But there are several shocks coming, and we know that from different regions, from different areas on the years coming, digital transformation becomes a must for this educational systems, for kids to continue learning. So having and establishing these joint partnerships is not a nice to have, but it is a must. And we have to act now, having to share standards and shared parameters. So when the next shock hits, our educational systems are ready, not in the same point that they were 6 years ago. So that's the urgency and on building resilience and partnerships for resilience. Andreas, please feel free to complement.
Yes, I think we all want to save the world, right? And so we want to work in the right direction together. And we also know that none of us can do it alone. To be honest, although we do have substantial amounts of money, it's not enough to overcome the barriers we're looking at. So money from the World Bank, money from IDB, money from the government, money from the private sector, and capacity from the private sector, absolutely critical. And the same on the digital side, right? I'm not an engineer. I can know how to use the connectivity, but we need the engineers to get out and establish that connectivity and know how to use it. So it takes a village to achieve a common goal. I think also it's critical that we have in mind our client governments, right? And we're going to hear from Guyana, one of the countries where we're working actively together. And I think that's the seal of approval, that we really make it work, that we combine and make it work for governments like Guyana. We also work together in Costa Rica on also the digital agenda. I think as we move forward, can we go forward with our mutual recognition framework that the institutions are working on, so that we have common rules? We expect we respect our common rules. We do division of labor. That I think will be really moving forward our partnership for the benefit of our clients. But it's a pleasure working together, and I think the more we sort of come together, the more we have our joint investment, the more impact we have. Thanks.
Thank you both. Now, my final question for the panel, and then we'll open for your questions as well. So, for Cristina and Anderson, the infrastructure investments need to also come together, the strategies from the governments as well as from the private sector. So thinking about connectivity, that is a specific case that probably requires more of this, I wanted to ask you what needs to be done to actually reduce uncertainty and align the public sector and private actors, and how do you see this making this possibility to happen in a sustainable and a scalable way?
Thanks a lot. I think that the ways that this is contributing to a more sustainable way of conducting, I think it's very clear. Now, in many dimensions that I think we discussed here, but I wanted to put that in a package here. Like the first thing is that the calculator makes this infrastructure needs visible in a much more concrete way. No? So if you have this visible in a much more concrete way, that leads like countries to identify really where the main gaps are, no? In connectivity, in devices, coverage, service levels, etc. No? And that visibility now that you have, that allows you to reduce the uncertainty in making that investment decision, and where and have the discussions that you need to have. No? And then the other part that that does is that by having that visibility, now you also can help governments to prioritize where to invest first. Is it to prioritize the goal of rural expansion, lagging regions, or national scale up? No? In that calculator, another angle that we discuss here, and that's very important then, is to realize this connectivity that we have across different topics. So the calculator reduces this fragmentation by linking infrastructure decision to other dimensions, such as was highlighted, teachers training, platforms, and the governance. No? So that makes easier to see infrastructure not as a standalone. And that's, I think, a core lesson that we need to see here. Like, we need to be moving in parallel in a holistic way, not taking the decision. So it's really part of a broader digital learning strategy. And then from our perspective, this is also improves then the dialogue between public, private sectors, because the conversation becomes more evidence-based and more operational, and looking at the whole different parts that need to move together. No? That's one of the key mistakes in development finance, no? That you start moving very fast in some angles and forget the rest. No? And then things don't materialize. No? So we have already seen the value of this kind of joint dialogue internally here. We're working now with education in our area in countries such as Peru and Bolivia. So in sum, like, the calculator does not just show where the needs are. This is very important because it helps turn those needs into more coordinated, scalable, and investment-ready decisions. So that's the great contribution that it makes. Thank you.
Well, I'm very aligned to what Anderson said. Let me say I'm a huge fan of this tool, huge fan, and I'm recommending all my clients to use it and to start looking at it in a broader way than they look at their investments. Generally, when the private sector looks at the investment like this in digital infrastructure, they just analyze. I mean, they have huge uncertainties, So any tool that help reduce these uncertainties, Anderson said it perfectly, it's super helpful. But in this case, some of these uncertainties, especially related to cost, but mostly related to where the demand is. To clarify this, it is huge. It is super important for the private clients and for us as financiers of these private clients to understand whether they are going straight to the point where these investments are needed. So this, for me, is the most powerful outcome of this tool. But not only that, as Anderson mentioned it very, very accurately, is helping this dialogue and helping this coordination. The private sector may not solve it all, but understand where the public sector needs are and where they are putting these investments is key for them, because they need to. The capital for the private sector is scarce. They have to choose where to put it, and they have to take decisions every day on how to invest this capital. Having this view of the long-term investments from the from the public sector and where the government is going make help them to take the decisions and make help us to decide whether if we're financing this investment is because it is needed and it is because it is part of a bigger framework where the government is investing as well, and where the private sector has a key role to deploy these resources. So this is, for me, one of the most powerful tools that we have seen in the past few years in terms of digital investments. And I said, huge fun. Thank you.
Thank you, Cristina. Thank you very much, everyone. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. I just want to leave you with one message, that is to avoid ineffective technology investments. It's not about not investing. It's about investing with data, with evidence, and using tools like this that can help you plan better and implement better. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you to our panelists for this insightful conversation. Now, let's bring this conversation closer to reality, to the countries across Latin America and the Caribbean, where digital transformation is actually happening every day. Let's watch the video together.
Every day, millions of students across Latin America and the Caribbean walk into classrooms shaped by very different realities. Some are connected, others are not. And when disruption hits, whether from crises, inequality, or system shocks, those gaps grow wider. The past few years have made one thing clear: education systems must be resilient, able to adapt, recover, and continue serving all learners. And digital transformation is no longer a future ambition. It is a present necessity. But digital transformation in education is not just about adding technology. It requires building an entire system with people in the center. When even one piece is missing or isn't properly aligned with others, the whole system struggles, and students feel the consequences. And without the right information, it becomes difficult to plan, prioritize, and build strategies that truly impact learning. That's why decision makers around Latin America and the Caribbean need better tools to navigate this complexity, to quantify it, and to start meaningful planning conversations that kick off digital transformation. Because all the dimensions need to be fully aligned for the impact to be felt where it matters most, in the classroom. That's the gap the Digital Learning Cost Calculator was built to close. A free, open tool developed by IDB and EDU to help countries plan digital transformation with clarity and evidence. It brings together 5 essential dimensions that are conditions to enable digital learning: connectivity, devices, teacher training, educational platforms, and governance. Because real transformation only happens when all 5 work together. The calculator allows decision makers to model different scenarios. Start with rural schools. Prioritize teachers. Focus on secondary students. Or plan for system-wide transformation. Always grounded in data, quality parameters, and real costs. With pre-filed country data, adaptable inputs, and instant outputs, it turns complexity into actionable insight. Because digital education is not just about technology, it's about making the right decisions before you invest.
Thank you.
What we have just seen reminds us something very important. Digital transformation is not abstract. It is happening in real schools, in the real communities across countries with a very different realities. And that diversity of context is precisely where the challenge emerges. With that in mind, let us move to the next panel, Policy Dialogue, Digital Learning from Information Gaps to Action. In this conversation, we will hear directly from the country leaders about their experiences, the challenge they face, and how tools like the Digital Learning Cost Calculator can help us move from the uncertainty to the real action. I'm pleased to introduce our panelists. From Guyana, Phil Mingo, Head of the Information System Unit at the Ministry of Education. From Honduras, Denis Caceres, Deputy Minister for Technical and Pedagogical Affairs at the Ministry of Education. And from Brazil, Ana del Fabro, General Coordinator for Digital Education, Innovation and Connectivity at the Secretariat of Basic Education. The discussion will be moderated by Mercedes Mateo, Chief of the Education Division at IDB. Please give them the big applause.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here and surrounded by such honorable guest speakers. So let me first just highlight the fact that we are now moving from experts to the doers. So these are the actual people that are behind the programs, the public policy. And in a panel that is going to be speaking, as Kyung-min said, about not just how we translate information into real action. And so I wanted to start by a quick reflection before passing the floor to the panelists. In the last few decades, there has been the debate about digitalization of education has been transitioning. And it's been moving from whether or not to use technology for education. You remember 2007, Ceibal, Uruguay, and the whole conversation about whether or not we should bring connectivity and digital devices into the classroom. Then we moved into the pandemic, COVID-19, and at that moment, there was a realization that the actually digital transformation was an imperative to make the education services resilient. So to make sure that no matter where and how, no matter the conditions, we could actually provide a decent education service. And so that was a second moment. And the third moment, I would say, is today, where AI, and that's what that was mentioned in the last panel, AI, cell phones, social media have actually shifted the conversation towards the more sophisticated one, which is when, how, and who, for whom should technology be used. So this conversation takes place among this kind of change in paradigm about digital education. So now turning into the region, about 160 million students, over about 800,000 schools, about 7.5 million teachers. These are the numbers that we are talking about, but still with huge challenges in terms of bringing connectivity and bringing digitalization and digital transformation with teachers in as part of the equation of education into the classroom. So about 45% of primary schools are connected to the internet today. Nearly 29 million children and adolescents remain completely disconnected from digitalization for education, as Andreas mentioned before, not from cell phones, but just from the opportunity to learn with digital tools. And in some countries, about 30% of schools lack basic digital tools to actually provide this service to their students. And teachers, about 20% of teachers have the basic level of knowledge to actively use in the classroom digital technology. So we have here representatives from Guyana, Honduras, and Brazil, 3 very different yet with some commonalities in their experiences that we've been discussing this morning. And we're going to be talking about the role of information to actually accelerate progress. So let me start with you, Anna. In your role as General Coordinator for Digital Education, Innovation, and Connectivity in Brazil's Minister of Education, you are working really, this is what is called working at scale. It's a continent, right, Brazil, on its own. And the largest, the most diverse country, 47 million students, 26 states, over 5,000 municipalities, 150,000 public schools. That's a lot. So you have a strategy which is called ENEC for to connect every single public school to bring transformation. And so how have you navigated the shift from identifying gaps, where we know Mega Edu played an important role, to actually implementing solutions, how important it has been to have clear parameters, standards, even rough cost estimates to guide those decisions?
Now it's working. Yeah. Hi, good morning, everyone. First of all, thank you, Mercedes and Gabriela here for the invitation to be here. It's a pleasure. In Brazil, when we arrived in government 3 years ago, our first concern was on mapping and having a clear diagnosis on what was the challenge. So we needed to identify which schools were not connected to the internet, where they were, which was a big challenge because we're talking about schools in the middle of the Amazon forest, really difficult to locate. And we needed to understand what they needed. So the first challenge was inside government because we had like the Ministry of Communications with one view on what the school connectivity issue was, which was really different from the Ministry of Education view. So Anderson mentioned the importance of bringing 2 sectors here at IDB to be able to build this calculator. And in Brazil, it was really important to see like different ministries to agree on a common diagnosis. So having the data on where the schools were, what were the different challenges. So we had schools on cities, urban cities that needed to improve the quality of connectivity, but they were already connected. We had schools without electricity, without any connectivity in the Amazon region, really far away from any fiber point of access. So we had to look at all of the schools, group them, so we were able to discuss which solution each of them needed. So that was the first step, and being able inside the government to agree on what was that diagnosis. And then I think the discussion on standards were really relevant as well. So we knew that that specific school lacked electricity, connectivity, but what should we actually provide? So we started a discussion on internet speed. So which is the speed we need to provide in order to that school to be able to use connectivity for pedagogical purposes. So that was key in our discussion in Brazil. We didn't want the school to be connected mainly, simply. We needed the school to be connected in a way that teachers and students could actually use connectivity inside the classroom with the devices in order to use it for digital learning. So it was a discussion on the speed internet, the Wi-Fi. So we wanted all the classrooms connected. And that was a huge challenge in Brazil. So we did have an amount of schools that had some connectivity, but it was reaching just like the manager department in the school. It was not reaching all the classrooms. So it was impossible to use for digital learning. So establishing those standards at first, it was an important line on where we wanted to be now in 2026. And that gap between, the actual diagnosis of the school and where we wanted to achieve where we wanted to reach was really important. So establishing the standards was a key. And then it was not only about establishing connectivity standards. So Andreas mentioned the relevance of other dimensions as well. So in Brazil, we also discussed what is this teacher training we need. So which digital competencies the teachers need to develop in order to be able to have a good digital learning inside the schools. And for us as well, not only an issue of digital competencies from teacher, but also discussing curricula. So, okay, when we get in the schools with the devices, with the connectivity, what should our students learn? So we had a discussion on national reference on curriculum in order to advance a bit as well. That's not just using technology as a tool, but actually learning about technology as well in a critical, meaningful way. So that was another standard that was really important. So after having this whole vision of where we want to go, we were able to sit and discuss inside the federal government with states, municipalities, in order to establish a realistic plan, an executable plan. So that's, I think, the kickstart.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Anna. I just want to, you mentioned agreeing on a common diagnostic between the different parts. Standards critical also. It's not the same bringing connectivity to school than bringing education to a hospital or to a community, so for private use. And the other thing that you mentioned about content implications. What should the students learn and how a student should learn with and about technology? I like very much that last part. So now we're gonna move into Guyana. Phil, Anderson actually in the previous panel mentioned about we speak very different languages, and I think you're very well placed coming from the information systems unit at the Ministry of Education. I'm sure that this is a daily challenge that you face. And so Guyana is an interesting case because it's going through rapid economic transformation. It's at the same time creating new fiscal space, but also urgent pressures to invest wisely and quickly on talent, on human capital. So from your experience, data shows today that connectivity costs and infrastructure gaps, as we've seen, are very specific to small island or to coastal systems or to countries where you have very different geographical realities, right? In the case of Guyana, how does this challenge of planning with limited information and resources play out in practice?
First of all, I want to say thanks. Thanks to the IDB, Gabi and the team to really organizing and inviting us. As Brazil said, I mean, while Guyana has its uniqueness, many parts of Guyana is similar to Brazil in terms of the Amazon. So we have some of the challenges that they have, we have as well. What we realize is that digital transformation is not a single procurement decision. You know, we have to carefully design, complete every sort of facet. And so that's why the learning calculator will be instrumental for us, because we have essentially been, at times you want to, as the fellow from World Bank said, you know, you want to buy devices, you want to get connectivity, but then without teacher training, without governance and all these things, you know, you sometimes you're wondering, why are you not seeing the successes that you expect? And so the question that you mentioned is very critical because it forces us to realize that we need to plan properly. In Guyana, we don't start with perfect information. From the coast, we may have reliable data, but from the hinterland, you know, it might be a strain to the point where sometimes 3 months and you're not getting some of the responses that you require. We have a relatively small education system. I mean, we have just over 10,000 teachers and 170,000 high school students. But even though we are small, the challenges we have are not simple. And so what our smallness should, one of the advantage actually, it helps us to coordinate faster. We could bring persons in and have a sit down and coordinate. But then, of course, we have the challenge of, after the coordination, put in the money where you're trying to implement something becomes a challenge, because yes, you can have 5,000 devices, but how do they get to the schools? You may have the devices, you know how they're going to get to the schools, but do they have electricity at the schools, or reliable electricity? And so, for example, the distance from that particular school to the nearest port. So planning devices, equipment, connectivity, hardware maintenance, replacement cycles, these are logistics that are not afterthought. They have to be considered even from the start. And this shapes certainly our costs, our timing, the way we're able to support, and whether any implementation is sustainable. So what it means in practice is that the information we have is uneven. And so sometimes our approaches also might be uneven. And again, referring to the digital calculator, it helps us to realize that, look, we can target secondary schools in the rural areas in this way, and then we can target secondary schools in the coastal areas in another way. And not thinking that one single way in terms of planning will be effective. At the same time, we are strengthening, even though the information comes in like a piecemeal and so on, we are strengthening our EMIS, which is our Education Management Information Systems. And we're trying to have a baseline. So the teachers, what are their needs and so on, because we're giving schools their ability to send us information on their needs, because sometimes central ministry can think that we know what the school needs. In a general way, we do, but then we are not there every day. We don't know this peculiarness that, why is it students always turn up at 9 o'clock for school when school starts at 8 o'clock? It's the distance that the children have to travel, So what the learning calculator will help us to do as well is not remove the uncertainties, but it gives us a way to think carefully around it, right? It helps us to see different parts of the system, as I mentioned, those components, and instead of treating them as a separate part. So when we approach digital transformation, we have to think of everything. And that's what our planning unit are doing. That's what the finance ministry is realizing, that, when we ask for a certain amount of money, it's not just for teacher training, but also for devices, for connectivity, for ensuring that you have persons who are dedicated, as we would have had a discussion earlier, to going after the providers and ensuring that you don't have just connectivity at the admin building of the school, but every single classroom.
Thank you so much, Phil. And I got stuck with one of the things that you mentioned about in the hinterland. It takes about 3 months to get the information that you request. I mean, that's the practical reality. And then you connected that with the importance of the context, of the reality of the context. This is not just about the school. You might eventually have the resources and everything planned, as the calculator says, okay, X number of students, X number of teachers, X number of schools, and I need that much money to get to connectivity and devices to that particular school, and then get the teachers trained. But then the students get an hour later because transportation is not there. So this is actually the reality of education, and it takes more than just digitalization. It takes, as you say, thinking of everything. This is a system that needs to work consistently. So thanks for that. As you see, this is a fascinating conversation that could take us through the entire day, but I'm actually going to have to start closing because we unfortunately don't have the entire day for that. I'm going to ask a question to you all. And this has to do with how countries actually navigate the different starting points. But before that, no, sorry. I'm actually going to start with Denise. Lo voy a hacer en español.
I'm going to ask this question in English. Honduras. We've seen how the countries navigate their starting point. In the case of Honduras, this is the country that has the lowest connectivity levels in the region. And this is what the digital calculator calls Group 3. It doesn't have a high level of connectivity and therefore of digital transformation. At the same time, Honduras is a very interesting country because of all the work that you're performing, that you're doing with the teachers. Denise, how are you facing all of these decisions in terms of teachers, instructors, the prioritization? What has been the greatest challenge that you've had to face going from the planning stage to the implementation? Thank you so much for the invitation. It's great to be here. These are different countries with different realities. In Honduras, we had a very important meeting a few weeks ago. The President of the Republic called us. The Minister and Deputy Minister, which is I, heard that he wanted to connect all of the schools, but 50% of the schools are rural. Almost 70% of children live in poverty and a connectivity of about 10%. So he called the operators, he called those of us who do educational policies and said, provide the data. I want to connect half of the rural centers in this country. What we're doing is that we're promoting a transformation called STING, and the challenge is how to reach the poorest schools in the country, and these are, of course, the rural schools. This is a mountainous country. It's a country that is difficult to access. Many regions are difficult to access. Poverty is reflected directly in the educational centers that we have and in certain international centers. We did this study, for instance, in Pisa. And so why is it that we have the same Italian, Spanish, Swiss standards? We have to go to the lowest scale because we had students that didn't know how to read or write because even though they were 15. This is the challenge for Honduras. We have 18,000 schools, about 2 million students, 65,000 teachers. What is very important with the instructors that we learned with the PENTED program, which is the National Program for Educational and Digital Transformation, which was directed by the IDB with great success. This program taught us that if you work with the instructors, you will be successful. We can transform Honduran schools if we work together with the instructors, if we train them well, and after that we train the students. If we reach the school with a well-structured platform, if we do provide the best devices and we bring about the cultural change, because the final question after we left the president's office was, is it possible to connect the educational centers that are in the rural areas? It's been 200, 300 years that electricity has not arrived there. The president said, yes, we can do photovoltaic batteries. We have to be ingenious. We have to use our imagination to connect all these centers, the rural centers. But we had to overcome the fact that because they're small and poor schools, they could not receive internet. At this time, we are connecting, we're working to connect those educational centers to reach a greater degree degree of success. This is why we call the people that worked on the people that worked on the Pentec program that I mentioned earlier. We had to ask them, how much is the antenna? How much is the electricity? How much is it to have this platform? How much is it to train the teachers? When we did this cost analysis, if we do it on a great scale, it is possible to achieve all this. Some of the topics that you mentioned, and now I'm going to turn to English.
So that everybody it's on the same page, because Dennis' contribution was very important. He's the Deputy Minister for Technical and Pedagogical Affairs in Honduras, so we can just feel it brings the technological aspect into the conversation. He mentioned at least three points that are very critical for the conversation. One is about the political ambition. And that's very important. So I don't know, for all of you who were listening, they actually got a call from us for the president one day and say, I want 50% of the schools to be connected. That's the strong political ambition, which is important to get things moving. The second point is about geography. Geography matters. Geography is important. Geography determines public policy. And so the third dimension, which I think is critical in the Honduras case, is teachers first. And they made explicit commitment to how are we going to bring teachers into the equation of digital transformation in education. So now I know I've just received a note. We're going to have a surprise guest joining us in a few minutes. And before that, I have two main objectives. One is to close this panel, and the other one is to close the entire event. So wish me luck. Now, so I'm going to ask you a quick question, because there was one thing that we haven't discussed, but I think is very important. And I want to ask you to respond in about 1.5 minutes, if possible, for that one. We know that we cannot do everything out at once. Prioritization is key. So once, assuming that we have the data, we do have the information, how do we prioritize? Where would you start, each one of them, each one of you? Can you please try to address that quick question in 1.5 minutes? Thank you.
Yeah, wish me luck. So what we would try to do is to implement the system of components, the baseline, because the reality we realize is that we can't really prioritize between teacher training and having no infrastructure. Because by the time the teachers are trained and you get infrastructure, that information is gone, and the vice versa, and devices and so on. But what would it take for a particular region, region 1, the smallest, or region 7 or 8, to ensure that you have, that this whole thing works? May not necessarily be 100%, but how can it work to the minimum capacity and then move from there? So how many teachers can we get? How many devices? It may not be able to get devices for our students, but we can get for teachers. We may not get the best platform, but we can get something. We may not get, the government is going to make sure that there's all the policies in there. But for that region, the regional officer is embracing it. And with that, once we can make that a success, we can scale it up, because we don't have unlimited money to say we're going to implement wide scale right away.
Wonderful demonstration effect. So now, Dennis. Perdona, sí.
The question is, we have to prioritize. We can't do things all at the same time. What would be the prioritization? If you have to think of an element of how to do this in a sequence, what would the sequence be, and what would be the priority elements? First of all, we have to have this calculator in the country, because this is what we have to do right now. So we do have to connect a school. How much is it to do that? How much is internet? How much is energy? What is the distance between one school and the other? However, as a new government, what interests us is policies at a large scale, and the connectivity, satellite connectivity is what we will call it now, is a very important policy. It has a great impact, but we've also understood that when we come up with a great scale at a high, at an educational policy at a high scale, we have to understand what needs to be done to have the greatest impact. Honduras is going through a curricular transformation. We are overcoming barriers, but of course we need connectivity to bring closer all these levels of learning. And we're going beyond a national situation. We were not able to reach the poorest and the rural schools, but we see that this can be achieved. This calculator is arriving a little late because we needed about 2 or 3 weeks ago, but it got there, didn't it? It arrived. Thank you, Dennis. Thank you so much for these two topics. The fact that you're giving numbers to the decisions and the fact that you're making the right decisions. I think that political ambition is key, is very important in this very specific context. Ana.
In Brazil, for us, it was really important to not increase inequalities. So when you're dealing with technology, it's really much simpler to go and connect, a huge percentage of the schools, but the ones that are almost connected or like in urban areas. But we didn't want to do that. We really wanted to focus on those schools that were left behind for like many, many years. And so we were not only concerned about like increasing the big national percentage, so moving a lot of schools at the same time, but actually focusing putting a lot of effort on those, isolated schools in the Amazon region without electricity, without any connection. So we're really proud of the results we do have on the north region of Brazil, on the indigenous schools, quilombola schools in Brazil. So closing this gap was really relevant for us to move forward, because I think technology nowadays is it's always increasing inequality between schools. So that was crucial for us. And in terms of the strategy, it was also important in Brazil to look at the federative system. So in Brazil, our schools are not operated by the central government, by the state and municipal level. So it was important to see the capacity in which level of government and what the federal government could do better than the local governments, and how we could share responsibilities. So we focused a lot on the challenges that in the national level we would be more able to solve, like complex areas in the North region, and seek for cooperation with states and municipalities on things that were more at their hand, such as teacher training, for example, of course, with like guidance and incentives by the federal government. But looking at these different capacities was really key, because in the municipal level, sometimes it's really challenging to do like a public procurement of like really complex things. So how could we work together in a federative system was also really important for us to put together like a national strategy.
You're bringing here the aspect of governance. So how do you work together within a system, a complex system? But I love your first point about equality, because I think, and this is a nice way to close this panel, bringing the last mile of digital transformation to those schools that are remote, isolated, is not the same as bringing connectivity to urban areas. And that costs more. So from an equality perspective, and justified on the basis of equality, we need to know that paying for that last mile is more expensive than paying for the first mile. And this is extremely important. I think it's a nice way to close this debate, because equality is at the center of everything we do. Thank you so very much to all of you. And now I'm going to make an executive decision, because I'm going to invite Cristiani to actually join me closing this session, this half day of discussion and conversation about digital transformation. And I'm going to invite our panelists to please take a seat, and please a big round of applause, because it was extremely interesting to have you here. So we are going to close this session. We were supposed to have a little bit of a game here for you all, Not sure you're gonna be able to have that game, but we go with the closing remarks, and then if we have a little bit of time, we do the voting. Okay, great, super. So let's go ahead, Christiane. Here we are at the end of this moment, which is just the beginning of something that we started kind of 2 years ago or so, and it was a journey. It's been great to work with you, with Mega Edu in doing this, in having, as Gabriela said before, making a reality this dream, which is actually a tool for actually quantifying how much countries need to invest in order to close the digital gap in education. We would not have been able to do this without Anderson, wonderful team. Really, thank you so much for the partnership in this and bringing in, the public infrastructure and digital public infrastructure dimension to it. I also want to thank our partners in the countries, the doers of public policy, for your partnership, actually, for your trust in us. And I also want to thank the World Bank. We are working as a system. This is an example of it. And so we want to thank you for that. And now, Christiane, please go ahead.
No, it's a real pleasure because I think that the journey starts with like good data, and this is like an important piece now. Like countries in Latin America will have like the reliable data that they need to start the conversation, and the calculator supports especially on the prioritization. So we know that it's not possible to reach that amount. I would highlight that we are not expecting that like maximum $1 billion investment, which is that is going to be like the next step. But the calculators help the country understand how many hours you want to support, in which stage of education we can start. So there are options there that the calculator is helping with the evidence base, the countries on that journey of investments. And the last thing that I would love to highlight was something that we heard during the morning, which is the importance of bringing telecommunications and education together. So probably with that data, the countries are going to design new mechanisms, new investments, and new ways of financing that. You don't need to think that that number should be like all public investments, that some country need to have all of that right now to invest. You can phase it, you can prioritize, and you can also like design mechanisms to be better investments, also working with the banks and also the private sector to have like best sustainable ways of connecting and bringing technology to those spaces. So it was a real pleasure. I admire all the work that the bank is doing, and also World Bank and different organizations on the digital transformation of the region. So thank you very much.
Gianni, and now I'm going to ask, because the surprise guest has arrived, President Goldfein is here joining us today. I would like to ask for a big round of applause for President Goldfein. Thanks so much for joining us.
How are you? Hello, Gisela, how are you? Tudo bem, Gisela? Hello. Hi, everybody. No, I don't want to say any word, but just to welcome everybody. I'm here because I think this type of work is fundamental for our education, and linking this with the tools. And here we are in a joint work with other MDBs, with the World Bank, on a tool that can help countries. So thank you very much for being here. This is very, very important.